Books about happiness coming up. If you don't want to hear anything in the ballpark of a spoiler, skip this chapter. Got it. Hey everybody, welcome to Book Talks with Miss Thomas. I'm Miss Thomas and I love talking about good books. If you like hearing about good books, please subscribe. So in this video, I want to tell you about 3 books that I read that were really good. I recommend all 3, and they are about different people, different women in particular, searching for happiness. So the first book I want to talk about is The Happy Life of Isadora Bentley. And this, I listened to the audiobook and I really enjoyed it. Sorry about that, I'm back. I don't know if you noticed anything different, but I was wearing my glasses with transition lenses and I felt kind of weird because you can't see my eyes, you can't quite make them out. And I thought that was just, I don't know, I found that distracting. So I had to stop and switch glasses. Anyway, The Happy Life of Isadora Bentley was the story of Isadora, and Isadora is turning 30. It's her 30th birthday, and every year she celebrates her birthday by going to the grocery store and just tearing up the candy aisle. She gets all the junk food that she wants, and that's how she celebrates her birthday, alone with candy, because I guess she doesn't eat unhealthy food every other day of the year. When she's in line to purchase all the junk food, she sees a tabloid, and there's an article in the tabloid about 31 ways to be happy. And Isadora is a researcher. She's very intellectual, and she thinks that this article is absolute bunk. And she decides she's going to buy the tabloid and do the 31 things in the article to be happy so that she can disprove the article. She's set out to prove that the article is wrong, that you can't do things to make yourself happy from a list in a tabloid. And so obviously she's a pretty unhappy person. You know, she's spending her 30th birthday by herself, and she struggles with relating to people. So she doesn't really have anyone close to her in her life. And her mother is just a royal Bichon. You know, the more you get into what her mother was like, you think, you know, oh, she sounds like an awful person. So anyway, Isadora is set out to do these 31 things. And the first thing on the list she figures she's going to try is smile. And so there's this whole thing about her trying to smile, which is pretty funny because, you know, she describes how she looks like, you know, I think it's like she looks constipated or something. You know, she's really uncomfortable with the way she looks when she smiles. And obviously it's not something she does often enough. She finally gets the hang of smiling, and during her lunch break, she goes out into the courtyard. She works at a college. She's a researcher for a college. So she goes out into the courtyard of the college and she smiles at a total stranger, and he smiles back. And so they form a friendship. Now, before you get any weird ideas, he's an elderly gentleman. He's a very sweet elderly man. So it's not that kind of friendship. But she does form a really sweet friendship with this elderly man. And it just, one thing leads to another, you know, then she ends up friends with her neighbor, Darby, because the next thing on the list is to exercise more. And so she runs into her neighbor out in her apartment complex when she mentions that she's going to go to a yoga class. And her neighbor immediately says, "Oh, I love yoga," and invites herself along. And so the two of them start going to yoga together. So now here is Isadora, who's not used to dealing with people, doesn't really seem to like people. And she's got this man that she has lunch with in the courtyard and this neighbor, Darby. And Darby has, I believe it's 4 children. And one of the children, Delilah, is like a little miniature Isadora. Delilah is very intellectual, very, I don't know, Delilah is a bit socially awkward perhaps. And so Isadora really relates to Delilah. And so she finds herself caring very much about Delilah and, of course, Darby and Darby's whole family. And so as the story unfolds, Isadora, as she searches for happiness, she ends up making friends along the way and building relationships with different people. And it just turns into a really lovely search for happiness that Isadora most definitely finds. And I loved that book. Now, it sort of reminded me of Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. If you liked that book, I think you'd like this book. And likewise, if you liked this book, maybe you should go look into that one. So that one is also a story about a woman who sort of has to deal with people and isn't really comfortable dealing with people. But then as she starts engaging with people, she starts to build relationships and friendships. And it's just very uplifting and endearing. Although the Eleanor Oliphant book, it's also pretty sad at some point. So I have to warn you. Isadora Bentley I don't think it was sad. There wasn't. Well, I mean, sometimes people were unkind, and Isadora talks about the unkindness that she's experienced. But for the most part, it was a really uplifting, joyful book, and I highly recommend it. It was adorable. Oh, I also want to say about Isadora Bentley, I thought that it was a secular book. I didn't really think that it was marketed as a Christian book, but I felt like there was faith content in the book as I was listening to the audiobook. For example, Delilah, the little girl, at one point she says to Isadora before they eat, "Hey, we should say grace." And Isadora's like, "Well, why?" Because she doesn't seem to have a lot of faith in God. And the little girl Delilah does. And so this little girl, in her own way, witnesses to Isadora. I thought that was really sweet. And there was just a little bit of faith content in the book, which I thought was lovely for a secular book. And I'm not sure if it's marketed as a secular or a Christian book, because at the very end, I did notice that it was published by Tommy Nelson. And also, Delilah's mom, Darby, has a very powerful discussion with Isadora toward the end of the book about forgiveness that I thought had a beautiful faith content. Even though it didn't directly reference, the Bible, the idea of forgiveness and the conversation about forgiveness was very beautiful. Darby says, forgiveness isn't about the other person, it's about you. It's about you have to forgive others so that you can find peace. And I just really thought that was a lovely conversation, a lovely passage in the book. And also later in the book, Isadora, at one point, she does stand up for herself and she has this outburst, really, but she's sticking up for herself. And another girl at work sees it, and the girl says to her later, she says, you've really inspired me. I've been taken for granted myself, and I saw you stick up for yourself, and it made me want to stick up for myself. And so there was definitely a lot of really lovely things in the book. Like I say, it was published by Tommy Nelson. I don't know that I would specifically call that Christian content, but I thought it had a strong faith content, even though it wasn't directly stated that way. Now, if you have read The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp by Sara Brunsvold, that book is filled with wonderful faith content. And I finally got around to her second book, her latest and greatest, The Divine Proverb of Streusel. And this one, I like this one even better than Mrs. Kipp. So this is the story of Nikki. And Nikki is a teacher. Maybe that's why I liked it, because I'm a teacher too. And just like Nikki, I'm ready for summer vacation, and the book kicks off at the end of the school year. Nikki is ready for summer vacation when she gets a call from her sister and she finds out that her father has remarried, and there are pictures on social media. So Nikki and her sister and their mother, they're all reeling from the father just walking out on them, all three of them. He's just walked away. And now they see on social media that he's remarried, and he hasn't had much of anything to do with them. And then Nikki's got this wonderful boyfriend. I mean, he is like Mr. Perfect. And she thinks that he's thinking about proposing to her, like soon, maybe that evening, because He has invited her to a lovely romantic dinner, and she's worried that he's going to propose, and she's just so confused and hurt right now from her father leaving and his remarriage. She's not really sure how she feels about marriage right now at this point in her life. She knows that Isaac, the boyfriend, he is great and she loves him, but she just doesn't know how to tell him what she's dealing with and that she's having second thoughts, not so much about him, but about marriage and commitment and the future. So she gets in her car, she's thinking she's going to go out to this romantic meal with Isaac, and she's not really sure what to do. And she just keeps driving and driving, and she rejects Isaac's phone calls and ends up at her Uncle Wes's farm, which is a couple of hours away. So, surprise, Isaac, sorry I didn't show up for dinner. I decided to go stay with Uncle Wes. And of course, Isaac's not happy about that. But she shows up at her Uncle Wes's farm, and Uncle Wes is a godly man. He's just, terrific like Isaac. From a literary perspective, I would say Wes and Isaac are foils to her father, Chris, because her father, Chris, is just so selfish in this book. But anyway, Nikki shows up to stay with Isaac, and Isaac is in the process of redecorating a house. He's sort of refurbishing it. And so he has a few things he needs to do, like the floors and the cabinets and things like that. So Nikki decides she's going to stay on and help him. And while she does that, she discovers some of her late grandmother's belongings. And one of them is a cookbook. And each recipe in the cookbook has a Bible verse and just some wisdom from Grandma, and just a little bit about faith and how food nourishes people and faith nourishes people, and they go together. And the recipes are cooked with love from godly women. And so as Nikki is reading the cookbook, she decides to try some of these recipes. And so she tries doing some cooking for Uncle Wes. And then she ends up bringing in a woman from church that she's run into in some of the stores named Joyce to come over and help her cook. And of course, Uncle Wes, has a thing for Joyce, and he's struggling with that himself. So Nikki's not the only one dealing with a shattered heart. Wes seems to be a little hurt and confused himself, and he's not quite sure how to go about his feelings for Joyce. And so there's a little bit of love in there, a lot of love actually, and just cooking and faith, and it was really sweet. And so the whole book was about how Nikki tries to grow closer to her roots through her grandma and her grandma's recipes and the wisdom peppered in the book with the recipes. And as Nikki starts to think about that, she starts to just really learn about her own feelings about faith and love, and if she's ready to move forward with Isaac. And so it was just a really sweet book also about healing from the pain someone else has caused, but moving on into happiness after healing from that pain. So I thought it was a really sweet, inspiring book, and one that I recommend. Now, another book about finding happiness, specifically after parents get divorced, is this one, Right Where I Belong. And this one I've actually had for a while. I bought it. This is, if any of you are on book buying freezes and you're revisiting the books on your shelf, this is a great example of why we should do that. I found this on my bookshelf. I bought it over a year ago. I didn't remember anything about it. And it's the summertime, and I saw an ocean, and I thought, okay, I'll read this. And I really love this. I can't believe this has just been collecting dust in my house, because it was a really sweet book. This is the story of Natalia. And actually, I also didn't know this is a YA book, but I still recommend it. I didn't even know it was YA until after I finished it. As a middle-aged woman, I just loved it. So this is the story of Natalia, and Natalia lives in Madrid, I believe. Hang on. So Natalia is in Spain somewhere. It just says Spain. It doesn't say Madrid for sure, but I think for some reason it was Madrid. But she is in Spain when her father announces that he is going to divorce her stepmother. And her stepmother, Maureen, is wife number 3, and he's already moving on to wife number 4. And Natalia is very attached to Maureen. She likes her stepmother, Maureen, and she just doesn't feel at home with her father. She feels more connected to to her stepmother, Maureen. And Maureen is going to move back to Florida with her family. And Natalia gets the bright idea that she would like to move back to Florida with her stepmom. So she's going to leave her father and her biological mother and go to Florida. Now, both of Natalia's natural parents, the father and mother, they're both very big corporate giants. They're both very successful with the things of this world, while Natalia is attached to Maureen because Maureen is a Christian and she wants to be around Maureen and be around Christians, and she doesn't feel like she has that in Spain. So she goes to Florida with Maureen, and she is enrolled in a Christian school. And so I just loved that. I loved all the teenagers in the Christian school, you know, and Natalia's perspective of navigating this Christian school. And she's so excited to go to Bible class and learn about God. And the other kids at the school are like, ew, I don't want to go to that class. It's hard. And Natalia is just all in. And there's this boy named Brian. He's the pastor's son. And Natalia forms a friendship with him. She doesn't want anything to do with boys. I mean, romantically. She has decided that because of her father, it's just a bad idea to get mixed up in anything romantic. And so she wants to be friends with Brian, but that's it. But she does have feelings for Brian, and Brian has feelings for her. And then there's this Mr. Popular guy, and he's just a real piece of work. I mean, he's just arrogant and just mean. And he decides he's going to be Natalia's boyfriend because she's new and she's popular and she's pretty, and she is in no way interested in him. So that creates a little bit of a conflict there because she's trying to be friends with Brian and not be romantically involved with anybody. And Mr. Popular is trying to embarrass Brian and make him look bad. It's just a lot of high school drama. But I loved it. I loved how the characters in the book, they were teenagers and they all loved the Lord. Even Mr. Popular, he had a heart for the Lord. We didn't see that until the end, but it was there. And I don't think that's a huge spoiler because really the story is about Natalia finding where she belongs. And I don't know, I just love this story. Also in the book, the teenagers go on a mission trip, and a lot happens on the mission trip too, where the teenagers are confronted with tremendous poverty and hurting, and they do a little bit of evaluation of how good they have it actually in Florida. And you know, it was just a really lovely book. I really enjoyed it. And I've never heard of this author. Her name is Krista McGee. And I did see she's written other books, so I will definitely investigate those because I enjoyed Right Where I Belong. So those are my 3 fiction books about happiness, and all of them made me happy. I highly recommend them. I think each book shows us a character, specifically a woman or a young woman's pursuit of happiness and how they go about achieving that. And I just thought it was so uplifting and enjoyable to read all 3 of them.